You ever wondered what kind of person built the Great Wall of China? What about the Terracotta Army? Who would demand to be buried with like 8,000 life-sized figurines of soldiers and get their wish? What about China itself? Who made that a thing? Surprise, it was all one guy. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, arguably the most extra person to have ever lived in all of history. In the West, he's mostly known for being a tyrant who allegedly burnt books and buried scholars alive and tried to make himself immortal by ingesting mercury pills, which probably just killed him faster. But I think it's unfair that he's remembered for just these things. The rest of his life was so much more fascinating. Coco-chin. He was like the ultimate villain success story. He had a tragic childhood that drove him into an extremist view of how the world should be. Then he destroyed the world and rebuilt it according to that view. So much of what he did would define China for the next 2,000 years. And no matter how we feel about him, Chinese people cannot tell our history without speaking of him. So I am here to make sure you know more about his ridiculously dramatic life. The drama starts right with the circumstances of his birth. He was born a political hostage in an enemy capital, besieged by his own grandfather, after that grandfather had buried 400,000 of that enemy kingdom's soldiers alive in the deadliest battle of ancient times. I'm talking about the infamous Battle of Changping, the culmination of over 500 years of war and violence between the scattered nation-states across the Central Plains, the land that would become China. These scattered states are technically grouped under the Zhou dynasty, but by the end, none of them really cared what the kings of Zhou had to say. This was because the three dynasties that came before the Qing dynasty, Xia, Shang, and Zhou, did not have centralized power. They were more like, okay, so we are the most powerful tribe, therefore the rest of you need to listen to us. We claim all the territory under the heavens, and you can only rule an area if we say you can. But functionally, all their vassal states were independent and did their own thing. There were about 200 of these independent states at the start of the Spring and Autumn era, which then fought and consumed each other until they whittled down to a top 7, known as the 7 warring states. Toward the end, the states of Qing and Zhao were the strongest, thanks to effective political reforms, and they were locked in a heated rivalry for supremacy. Also, yes, the Zhao state is where my family name comes from. The character technically means speed walking. I am probably a descendant of them, and so was the first emperor. His mom was a Zhao woman, a dancer who married his father when his father was a political hostage in Zhao. Before I get into how this union happened, I have to give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Surfshark VPN. The 7 warring states depended as much on spies and informants as their armies, and if they had internet back then, they for sure would have masked their every move with a VPN. Did you know every website you visit can track your IP and service provider? Think carefully about which websites you visit. Do you really want them to have your information? If not, you should turn on a VPN like Surfshark to encrypt your data and IP. All it takes is one click. What's more, the most practical function of Surfshark is getting around annoying geo-restrictions. There's a great documentary about the first emperor of China done by the Smithsonian, and it's available for purchase right here on YouTube, but only in America. That's not a problem if you have Surfshark VPN, though. Just change your location to an American one, and you can watch the documentary as if you are in the United States yourself. Surfshark is available as a desktop program, a browser extension, and an app for mobile devices, and one account comes with unlimited installations, so you can use all of these on all the devices you own. You can use my code JAO to get Surfshark for 83% off plus 3 extra months for free, and they're also giving away their antivirus for free during this month. They have a 30-day money-back policy, so you have nothing to lose in deciding to try it out. I'll put the link in the description below. Anyway, back to warring states' political drama. During that era, when 2 states made an alliance, they would trade princes as collateral. The first emperor's dad, Yi Ren, was one of these collateral princes, though not a significant one. Stronger states could get away with sending a member of the royal family that nobody really cared about. And Yi Ren certainly fit that description. He was but one out of the 20+ sons of the Qing crown prince, and smack in the middle of the line too. He was basically sent to Zhao to be forgotten, and the Zhao knew that, so they didn't bother to treat him well. He probably would have languished there if he didn't catch the eye of a certain clever merchant named Li Buwei. See, in ancient China, merchants were considered the lowliest class of people. Even though they had money, they were not respected. The hierarchy of respect went officials, farmers, craftsmen, and then merchants. In some dynasties, merchants were physically banned from wearing fine silk, even though they were among the only people who could afford it. So Li Buwei was not satisfied being one of the richest men in the 7 warring states. He wanted power and prestige as well. He saw an opportunity in the forgotten hostage prince Yiren, because the political situation in Yiren's homeland of Qing was that its king was old, and the middle-aged crown prince had yet to designate an heir among his excessive gaggle of sons. This was because they were all born of concubines instead of his main wife, the crown princess Lady Huayang. They were probably holding out hope that she would get miraculously pregnant somehow, but at this point it was very clear that she was infertile. Usually in situations like this, the eldest son was the presumed heir, but Li Buwei realized that if he could get Lady Huayang to adopt this forgotten hostage prince Yiren as her own, he'd be skipped over all of his brothers and become the heir instead, which meant that one day he would become the king of Qing. Main wives were indeed allowed to adopt one of their husband's concubine sons as their own. They just didn't like to do it because ultimately it's still better to birth a son of your own and not have to deal with the kid's real mother. But Li Buwei was confident that he could convince Lady Huayang to adopt Yiren, and thus Yiren struck a deal with him. If Li Buwei could make Yiren the king of Qing, Yiren would share his kingdom with Li Buwei. And so Li Buwei left Yiren with 500 units of gold to improve his image and network in Zhao, while Li Buwei himself used another 500 units of gold to buy all sorts of lavish things and take off to Qing. Li Buwei was an extremely clever man. Instead of going directly to Lady Huayang, he networked with her siblings first. With an offering of his lavish gifts, he snagged a meeting with Lady Huayang's eldest sister. He told the sister how much of a good boy Yiren was, how he's constantly weeping from how much he misses his dad, the crown prince, and the crown princess Lady Huayang. Then Li Buwei said to the sister, "You know, I heard that those who gain favor with their beauty hardly ever keep that favor after their beauty fades. The crown princess should act fast to pick a good boy among the crown prince's sons and make him the official heir. Then, not only will she be respected while the crown prince lives, even after the crown prince passes away, she'll retain her position because the boy she chose will be king. It's a win-win situation. If she doesn't put this in place while she's young and beautiful, she just might regret it when her beauty fades, and the crown prince is no longer so inclined to listen to her. Right now, Yiren is definitely a good boy. He knows he has no chance of being heir while his birth mother is neglected. So if your sister extends a hand to him, he will serve her with all his heart and she will be secure in Qing for the rest of her life." After this, Li Buwei went to Lady Huayang's brother and gave basically the same spiel except more blunt. The siblings saw the merit in Li Buwei's plan, and both went to Lady Huayang to convince her to go through with it. Lady Huayang then convinced the crown prince to agree to pass Yiren under her name and make him the official heir. And so, this forgotten hostage prince was suddenly on the path to becoming king of the most powerful warring state. After Li Buwei got back to Zhao to deliver the earth-shaking news, he and Yiren obviously had a real good drink to celebrate. During the feast, Li Buwei called on a beautiful concubine of his to dance for them. Yiren was spellbound by this concubine, so much that he asked to take her as his own. Li Buwei was aghast. Like, wow, you're not even king yet and you're straight up demanding people's concubines? But he could no longer say that out loud. He'd sunk so much money and effort into Yiren, and didn't want their relationship to break apart over one woman, so he begrudgingly gave the concubine to Yiren. History never recorded her name. She is known simply as Lady Zhao. Historical gossip says that she was already pregnant with Li Buwei's son when she was given to Yiren, and that this whole exchange was part of Li Buwei's grand scheme to place his own descendants on the Qing throne. But this theory is unlikely. I mean, there would have been no way to confirm that she was pregnant with a boy instead of a girl. And also, royals aren't sloppy with their bloodlines. Kings and princes having so many concubines meant that their copulations had detailed records. There definitely would have been some kind of verification process to make sure it was Yiren's kid that Lady Zhao got pregnant with. Likely, this story was spun by the many people mad at the first emperor for conquering their homelands. Anyway, everything seemed to look up for Yiren after he secured a place in line for the Qing throne and snatched himself a wife. But then, one major issue emerged. Qing and Zhao went to war. A war that would culminate in Qing burying nearly the entire adult male population of Zhao alive, while Yiren was still stuck as a hostage in the Zhao capital. This mess, known as the Battle of Changping, started when Qing was attacking the smallest warring state, Han. Han had an elongated shape, and Qing seized a strategic point that cut off communication between its capital and its top half, the Shandong region. The king of Han was terrified of Qing, so he ordered Shandong to surrender, but that was the last thing the residents of Shandong wanted, because they were also terrified of Qing. See, Qing had a really bad reputation. It was known as the Kingdom of Tigers and Wolves to the other 6 states. About 100 years before this point, Qing went through a bunch of reforms that essentially turned the whole country into an MMO, like World of Warcraft. Or personally, I was more of a Mabinogi and Toontown player, but Qing legit established a system of 20 ranks of prestige for its citizens. You ranked up by turning in the heads of your enemies that you slayed on the battlefield. The higher up the ranks you rose, the more land and more servants and bigger houses you were given. Even the old aristocracy had all their privileges abolished and had to earn it back by ranking up on the battlefield. Also, Qing was arguably the world's first police state. Everyone got put in charge of spying on everyone else around them. Families got organized into units of 5. If you knew another family committed a crime and yet you didn't report them, you'd get punished along with them. And then these units of 5 families were also in charge of spying on other units. If your unit knew another unit were trying to hide each other's crimes, your unit would be punished with them. Same system applied in the army. Soldiers were organized into groups of 5 and formed a huge network of interconnected spying to make sure that nobody got away with any shenanigans. Snitching was mandatory. Naturally, Qing developed a reputation of being a kingdom of monsters who salivated at the sight of your head and lived under draconian laws. So instead of surrendering to that, the Shandong governor thought of a scheme. He offered all 17 cities in the Shandong to the Zhao state instead. The king of Zhao, who was only like 20-something at this point, knew this was a blatant play at dragging Zhao into the drama, but after consulting with his uncles, he was like, you know what? 17 whole cities is too good to pass up. We can handle the consequences of this. Qing, the kingdom of tigers and wolves, was obviously not going to let this pass, and thus the 2 strongest warring states came into conflict over Shandong. Zhao had a really famous seasoned general Lian Po on their side, considered one of the best in the whole warring states era, but even he couldn't fend off the Qing in the initial skirmishes. Seeing that Qing had a much longer supply line to the battleground than Zhao, Lian Po decided that the best move was to huddle his troops behind fortifications and fight a defensive war. They managed to hold their position, but as the battle dragged on over the months, the king of Zhao got more and more nervous over their dwindling resources and repeatedly sent Lian Po letters urging him to confront the Qing again. Qing took this opportunity to send agents to the Zhao capital to spread gossip about how much of a coward Lian Po had become in his old age, and how the person Qing feared most was this young dude, Zhao Ko, who was the son of this other Zhao general who had famously defeated Qing once, a rare feat in those days. So the king of Zhao swapped Lian Po out for young Zhao Ko, who went in with a much more aggressive war strategy. But the moment he led his troops out from behind the defense lines, the Qing lured him into a trap and split his army in 2, surrounded them, and cut off their supply lines. The Zhao troops were starved for 46 days, to the point that they were cannibalizing each other. After poor young Zhao Kuo died trying to break the siege, the Zhao army surrendered. Concerned that they'd be free to start more shit another day if they were allowed to walk away, the Qing general Bai Qi ordered the 400,000 Zhao troops buried alive. All except for 240 underage soldiers who he sent back to Zhao to spread terror. Now, there's some controversy over the accuracy of this 400,000 figure and whether they were really buried alive or killed before they were buried, but no matter what, the Qing killed a lot of Zhao that day. In the 2,000 years since, residents of Changping have regularly dug up mass graves of skeletons there. It's brutal. War is brutal. A few months after this unprecedented massacre, the baby future first emperor of China was born in the Zhao capital to Yiren, a prince of Qing, and his Zhao wife, a union suddenly tainted by 400,000 lives. They named him Jun, which means politics. He's usually referred to as Qin Shi Huang, but that's not his name, it's his title, literally meaning first Qing emperor. I have to note that you can't shorten this title to just Qing or Qin Shi. That sounds weird. You have to say either Qin Shi Huang or Shi Huangdi. Also, there's controversy about which exact family name he would have used, but it's too complicated to explain without going into a lecture about how clan names worked in pre-imperial China. So I'm just gonna call him the name that he's most commonly assigned. Ying Zheng. After the Battle of Changping, there was another mess where Zhao and Han agreed to peace terms with Qing, but then backed out on their end of the bargain, and long story short, the king of Qing, baby Ying Zheng's great-grandfather, put the Zhao capital under siege. The siege went on for 3 years and got so bad that people in the city were trading children to eat and making fires with human bones. The Zhao wanted to kill Prince Yiren out of frustration, but Li Buwei, the shady merchant, used 600 units of gold to bribe the gatekeepers into letting him and Yiren escape. They couldn't get Lady Zhao and baby Ying Zheng out with them though, so they were just left there in the besieged city full of cannibals. Historical records say she took shelter with her prominent family, but she and Ying Zheng must not have had a good time, because after Ying Zheng conquered Zhao like 30 years later, he personally headed to the Zhao capital to bury their tormentors alive. There's a lot of people being buried alive, I know. I've gone on for so long about the context around the first emperor's birth, because I truly believe that you cannot understand him and the things he did until you understand the extreme circumstances he was born in. War defined his existence. He was born haunted by massacres and cannibalism, and no doubt he was made to suffer as a child, solely because his father was a Qing prince, even though he was born and raised Zhao. There's really much to think about in how the Battle of Changping and the subsequent siege, basically everything terrible about the Warring States era taken to its peak, produced the one person who would end it all. The siege on the Zhao capital was eventually broken through a really intense sequence of political maneuvers that I won't get into, but Ying Zheng and his mom remained trapped in there. He grew up with his life hanging in the balance in this enemy kingdom who hated everything he represented, and only when he was 9 years old, after his grandpa became the king and his dad became crown prince, were he and his mom taken to Qing. But then things moved really quickly and suspiciously. His grandpa died just 3 days after his coronation. Suddenly, his dad was the king, his dancer concubine of a mother was queen, and he was the crown prince. Yiren fulfilled his deal with Li Buwei and made Li Buwei his prime minister, and gave him a huge, rich fiefdom. And then just 3 years later, Yiren died too, at the ripe age of 35, and 13-year-old Ying Zheng became the new king of Qing. I find this sequence of events so suspicious. There is no way to confirm how his dad and grandpa died, and whether Li Buwei was involved, but 3 kings of Qing just happened to die within 4 years, leaving Li Buwei as a regent to a preteen king? Sus, I tell you. Now, Li Buwei was not only the richest man in the 7 warring states, he was also the most powerful. The Queen Dowager of Qing was his former lover, the young king of Qing called him second father. He was at the top of his game, which meant he could only go downhill from there. Ironically, it was Lady Zhao, the woman who he had traded away like a game piece, who would become his downfall. I mean, she had to spend 9 years as a single mother while her countrymen despised her for marrying and procreating with their mortal enemy. Then, she may have gone from a dancer to a queen, but she was widowed in her early 30s and stuck in the palace for the rest of her life in a foreign country where she didn't know anyone. Except Li Buwei, that was. So she demanded he keep her company, summoning him to the palace over and over under the guise of discussing political matters. This made him super nervous because having an affair with the Queen Dowager could tank his reputation, so he introduced her to a man renowned for, having a large penis. Seriously, the historical records say that this dude could hang a wagon wheel on it and make the wheel spin. I don't know how exactly that worked either, there are no details beyond this. Regardless, Li Buwei arranged for this guy, named Lao Ai, to get charged with some random crime and sentenced to a life as a eunuch. Except they faked the castration, and Lao Ai went into the palace fully endowed. Lady Dowager Jia was very satisfied, and stopped bugging Li Buwei. But then she got pregnant. With an excuse that the palace had bad feng shui and was making her sick, she absconded off to an old palace in a previous Qing capital. Ying Zheng was too young to think much of it, so she got away with it. And honestly, if this was the end of the story, it would have been fine. Women had more freedom in this era than most Chinese dynasties, and it was implicitly accepted that queen dowagers could take lovers after their king died. Ying Zheng's great-great-grandma famously took the chief of a nomad tribe as a lover to stop the tribe from threatening Qing. Then she killed the chief and the kids they had together once the time was right. She was ruthless, and actually my favorite female Chinese historical figure. That's right, Wu Zetian is only ranked second in my heart to Queen Dowager Xuan. Someday I'll make a full video about how iconic she was. Lady Zhao was definitely no Queen Dowager Xuan though. She made the mistake of giving Lao Ai actual political power and letting him make decisions regarding affairs of state, so people soon rushed to buddy up to him. Within a few years, he grew powerful enough to rival Buwei, and arrogant enough to call himself stepfather of the King of Qing, as if Ying Zheng didn't have enough disputed dads. Though here's where I think there's a deeper story than what the records say. There is no way that Lady Zhao could have given Lao Ai this much power on her own. I think the other 6 states had at least some kind of hand in supporting Lao Ai in hopes of fracturing Qing internally. There's also speculation that Lao Ai had a hand in settling a rebellion kicked off by Ying Zheng's younger brother, who his dad had with a concubine, while Ying Zheng and Lady Zhao were suffering in Zhao. For his possible contribution to quelling this rebellion, Lao Ai was made the Marquis of Changping. But as Ying Zheng approached adulthood, Lao Ai started getting nervous. In ancient Chinese tradition, men came of age at 20 when they would tie up all their hair and be considered an adult. For kings who took the throne as children, this would be when they would gain full sovereignty. But for some reason, this ceremony was not planned for Ying Zheng until he was 22. There is debate over whether this was a sinister delay or whether it was just Qing tradition for their kings to come of age later, because his great-grandfather also had a ceremony at the ripe old age of 22. But no matter what, Ying Zheng could no longer be denied his rightful power. Lao Ai did not want this to happen, so he plotted to kill Ying Zheng and replace him with one of the 2 sons he had with Lady Zhao at that point. During Ying Zheng's coming-of-age ceremony, Lao Ai stole Lady Zhao's command seal and summoned an army to attack Ying Zheng. But Ying Zheng was on guard about potential shenanigans, so he had a force of his own ready to thwart the coup. This event isn't much more than a political footnote in the records, but if you look at the details, it was a big deal. There was a massive battle in the Qing capital, and the rebels included the head of palace security, the commander of the capital's army, the head palace advisor, the head of palace archers, and more. Those are some prominent positions. 4,000 families were penalized in association with this mess. So again, I feel like there's a lot of detail that didn't get recorded, and I believe this is a part of a larger effort on the first emperor's part to erase all information to do with his personal life, because details about his interpersonal relationships are shockingly sparse. He had at least 20 children, yet it's impossible to find any information on the woman who gave birth to them. I believe he had a deep mistrust of intimacy after being betrayed by everyone related to him. I mean, look at the show that just happened. His own mom let her lover try and kill him. When Ying Zheng found the 2 kids she had with Lao Ai, his 2 half-brothers, he stuffed them into sacks and smashed them to death. Lao Ai himself was drawn and quartered. They probably needed 6 horses. Ying Zheng then exiled his mom and reportedly boiled 27 officials alive for suggesting he not do that. But then the 28th person convinced him that he needs to at least pretend to abide by filial piety to be respected by the other states. So he begrudgingly invited her back to the palace. As for Buwei, that poor bastard actually had nothing to do with this coup and even helped suppress it, but he was still guilty of having introduced Lao Ai to Lady Zhao. Enraged, Ying Zheng stripped Buwei of his position as regent and exiled him to his fiefdom. But after a year went by, Buwei was still regularly receiving a ton of political visitors, so Ying Zheng sent him an extremely angry letter asking, "What have you done for Qing, for you to have been given a fiefdom of 10,000 families? What blood ties do you have with me to have made me call you second father? Take your family and go to the Shu region." Buwei saw this for the threat it was, and realized that this kid he had raised as a pawn in his game of power had become a full-grown, terrifying king who would never forgive him for causing the ridiculous circumstances of his life. Opting to go out on his own terms, Buwei drank poison rather than face more of Ying Zhen's wrath. He had to be buried in secret, and Ying Zheng remained so angry that he decreed that anyone who cried for Buwei will be exiled. So that was that. Ying Zheng had brutally seized the full powers of his throne, and he was ready to chase his dreams of taking over the world. He spent the next few years preparing for it, which involved sending agents to the other states to bribe their high-level officials and sabotage or assassinate any officials who refused to take bribes. Some say that the 6 states fell as much to their own corruption as to the Qing armies. As extreme as his personality was, Ying Zheng was truly an effective king. His biggest strength was his ability to appreciate talent. At one point, he sent an army of 30,000 troops to the gates of the Han state just to demand they hand over this one scholar prince of theirs, whose essays he really liked. That's right, while other kings are sending armies for like Helen of Troy or something, he was sending armies to get stuttering scholars. He had a goal and he used whomever he saw fit to help him do it, no matter their birth circumstance or even prior criminal records. In 230 BCE, he officially kicked off his campaigns of conquest. He pulled it off in a mere 9 years, 1 against 6, and somehow he won. First, he took the Han state, the smallest one I mentioned earlier. It was quick and easy, no suspense there. Then he went after Zhao. This took like 3 invasions though, because Zhao had a genius general Li Mu on their side. This is where Qing's network of spies and agents came in. They bribed the corrupt Zhao chancellor Guo Kai, who was a childhood playmate of the king of Zhao, to go up to the king like, you know, I'm starting to think that Li Mu is trying to steal your army and proclaim himself king. You should test his loyalty. Recall him from the front lines. If he obeys, he's loyal. If he refuses, you know he's plotting something sinister. The king recalled Li Mu like suggested, and Li Mu refused because, hello, I am trying to defend the very existence of our kingdom here. But all the young and foolish king of Zhao saw was Li Mu's defiance, and so he ordered Li Mu executed for treason. This destroyed the morale of Zhao soldiers, and so the Qing army quickly overwhelmed them and took their capital. Then, Ying Zheng personally came to bury his old bullies alive. Suspiciously, the same year Zhao fell, Ying Zhen's mother, Lady Zhao, passed away. The remaining states were now seriously freaked out by what was happening. Shockingly, it was the state of Yan, the second smallest state, that put up the most infamous attempt at fighting back against Qing. By that, I mean they tried to assassinate Ying Zheng himself. There was even childhood friends to mortal enemies drama involved. See, the crown prince of Yan, named Dan, had also served as a hostage in Zhao, and thus he and Ying Zheng were childhood friends. They suffered together as kids under my ancestors. After Ying Zheng became king, he made a brief alliance with Yan, and Dan was sent to serve as hostage in Qing. But then Ying Zheng slighted him in some way, and Dan escaped back to Yan with murderous rage in his heart. Once Ying Zheng kicked off his plans to rule the world, Dan sought out a famed swordsman named Jin Ke and sent him to assassinate Ying Zheng with a dagger crafted by a legendary blacksmith and dipped in poison that would kill instantly upon breaking skin. Jin Ke got access to Ying Zheng by posing as a Yan official there to surrender some key Yan lands to Qing. He brought along a map of these lands and the head of a general who had defected from Qing years earlier, who willingly unalived himself to make Jin Ke's ruse more convincing. Jin Ke went on the mission with a partner who was reportedly so badass that he killed a guy in the street when he was just 13. But when they actually got to Ying Zhen's throne room, the partner got so nervous and looked so suspicious that Ying Zhen demanded Jin Ke come up to the throne alone. So Jin Ke did, with the poison dagger rolled up inside the map. Once he got to the table in front of Ying Zhen, he made a show of slowly unfurling the map. While Ying Zhen was distracted by the geographical details, Jin Ke uncovered the dagger, grabbed Ying Zhen's sleeve, and plunged the dagger toward Ying Zhen's heart. Ying Zhen reacted in a split second, lurching back so hard that he tore his silk sleeve clean off and broke free from Jin Ke's grasp. Jin Ke then began to chase Ying Zhen around a pillar in the throne room. Literally some Tom and Jerry madness. Here, the records say that because Qing laws were so strict, the officials weren't allowed to approach the throne without permission, and Ying Zhen forgot to yell out permission in the heat of the moment, so nobody could go up and help him. He did have a ceremonial sword on him, the heirloom sword of the Qing rulers, but the sword was so long, like 162 centimeters long, or 5'3", that he kept failing to pull it out of its scabbard. His officials were screaming at him to swing the scabbard behind him, or something. There's controversy around what exact motion they meant, but they shouted, "Bear your sword, my king! Bear your sword, my king!" The chase went on until finally, a royal physician threw a pouch of medicine at Jin Ke, which stunned him and delayed him for long enough that Ying Zhen finally managed to get his ridiculously long sword out of his scabbard, and he hacked Jin Ke to death. Before he bled out, Jin Ke slumped against the pillar in an extremely rude manner and said, "I could have gotten you if I wasn't trying to hold you hostage alive, so I could demand you give back all the land you took." But I think this is a cope because that is a terrible plan. If there's anything to be learned from the history of the warring states, is that the kings of Qing are not to be trusted. So who would believe that those lands would be returned with just a verbal confirmation? So alas, the whole operation was for nothing. Enraged by how his childhood friend tried to have him murdered, Ying Zheng sent his army after Yan. They stormed through most of the state and only relented when the king of Yan offered up the head of the crown prince, his own son, in exchange for a ceasefire. And so the poor, foolish prince had his head chopped off by his own dad and presented to Ying Zheng, once his friend. This would not be the only assassination attempt against Ying Zheng. Jin Ke had a friend back in Yan called Gao Jianli, and they would frequently play music together. After he learned that Jin Ke failed and was killed, Gao Jianli decided to fulfill his friend's mission. He slipped his way into the Qin court as a musician, but got recognized. Yet Ying Zheng liked the music he played, so he said that Gao Jianli could stay as a court musician as long as he was blinded. This did not deter Gao Jianli. Now blind, he played for Ying Zheng enough times that he was able to sit closer and closer, that one day he filled his instrument with lead and swung it at Ying Zheng's head in the middle of a performance. But he missed, probably because he was blind, and so he was executed. Meanwhile, the Qing army went after the Wei state, once a tough rival of theirs. But they fell in a really anticlimactic way. Their capital was built along the Yellow River, so the Qing general just broke the dikes along the river and flooded it. Next was the Chu state, a huge one that spanned basically the entire south. Ying Zheng gathered his generals and asked them how many troops they thought they needed to take Chu. The seasoned general Wang Jian, who had taken 2 of the states so far, said he needed at least 600,000. At this point, Ying Zheng was feeling pretty inflated about his string of victories, so he was like, are you kidding me? 600,000? That's almost the entirety of forces in Qing. So he turned to a younger general, Li Xing, also known as the protagonist of the manga Kingdom. If you follow this manga, beware that I'm about to spoil its eventual ending. Li Xing was young and cocky and said, I only need 200,000 to get the job done, which was exactly what Ying Zheng wanted to hear. So he was like, oh, General Wang Jian, you've gotten too cautious in your old age. And then he put Li Xing in charge of the Chu campaign instead. It ended up being an utter disaster. The records don't say much about why it failed, but historians have deduced from context clues and archaeological evidence that there was a betrayal from within the Qing court. See, Qing and Chu had a long tradition of intermarriage. Some 18 generations of Qing rulers had married Chu princesses, so the Qing court was full of people from Chu. Ying Zheng's dad having a queen from Zhao was actually a huge outlier. Even one of Ying Zheng's prime ministers was descended from a Chu prince, and also possibly his uncle in a complicated way, but it appears that when it came time to choose between Qing or Chu, that prime minister uncle chose to betray Qing and sabotage the Chu invasion. He fled from the Qing capital and stoked a rebellion behind Li Xing's army of 200,000, which forced it to turn around, but then it got chased into a trap by the Chu army up ahead, and they got nearly annihilated. It speaks volumes that Ying Zheng never punished any of the generals involved in this disastrous campaign. It's likely that he knew the failure wasn't really their fault. There's also speculation that he had a queen from Chu, and she was involved in this rebellion in some way as well, and was killed for it. Because, as I've said, there are no records of any of the women he had children with. He was buried alone in his gigantic mausoleum, which is really weird and a total anomaly among emperors. In ancient China, you were basically not considered a real man until you married. For him to have remained a bachelor for life in spite of that stigma, it's suspicious. Anyway, now he had to try and conquer Chu all over again. After he had been laughed off, the old general Wang Jian had retired with the excuse that he was sick. So Ying Zheng personally went to his house to apologize and asked him to lead a second campaign against Chu. It may surprise you, but Ying Zheng was capable of acting humble when the occasion called for it. Pretty sure he still delivered at least one death threat though after the apology. But Wang Jian got the full 600 troops he initially asked for and set off on a second campaign. The Chu were all rearing to go and ready to kick the invaders out of their homeland again, yet Wang Jian set up camp at the Chu border and then did nothing. The Chu were confused, but they had no choice but to keep their army at the border as well and wait for the Qing to make a move. And so they waited. And waited. And waited. This wait turned into a year. A whole year of Wang Jian doing nothing but playing games and hosting barbecues with his army of 600,000 soldiers. Soon, it was harvest season, and the Chu were going to run out of food if their men didn't go back home and do the harvest, so the Chu general made the painful decision to retreat. This was the opportunity that Wang Jian had been waiting for. He chased after the true army, whose morale had been worn down after a year of anxiety, and obliterated them. After this, Wang Jian turned his army north and finished off what remained of Yan, which had allied with some stragglers from Zhao. And then there was only one other warring state left: Qi. Qi actually had many opportunities to take in refugees and act as a haven of resistance against Qing, since it's on the very east, but it's said that Ying Zheng promised to share half of his conquered states with the king of Qi, as long as the king didn't interfere with the conquests. He even became sworn brothers with the king of Qi, but all of that went down the window when it was just Qing and Qi left. I imagine the king of Qi was like, "But Ying Zheng, I thought we were sworn brothers!" To which Ying Zheng was probably like, "Have you met me?" Thus, in the year 221 BCE, Qi surrendered without a fight, and the Central Plains were unified under a single government for the very first time. I have to emphasize that to the people then, it would have felt like he'd taken control of the entire world. I mean, they had no way of knowing that there were more people beyond the Pacific Ocean to the east, the jungles to the south, or the deserts and mountains to the west. The supervillain looming over the realm had won. There was no escape. So why did Qing win this 5-century-long tournament of nations? If you had been there at the start, you never would have guessed that they'd be the ones to pull this off. They started as a bunch of people raising horses for the kings of Zhou. They were frequently seen as barbarians, a crude and uncivilized people. There are a lot of factors to why they reigned supreme in the end, and there's no way I can cover it all in one video, but the consensus is that the 6 other states were defeated not only by Qing, but by the incompetence and corruption within their top ranks that they refused to reform. Qing had the miracle of landing 7 competent kings in a row, nearly unheard of in history, and they managed to reform their society and abolish feudal privileges. In an era where most other states only gave important positions to aristocrats and the well-connected, in Qing, you could rise through the ranks no matter the circumstances of your birth, as long as you had something to offer to its war effort. It was brutal, but brutal to everyone. The Qing mindset was simply on a different level than the other states. Ying Zheng especially was a visionary. After all 7 warring states were under his grasp, he thought the title of king wasn't lofty enough for him anymore, so he made up a new title, Huangdi, combining 2 kinds of titles from ancient myth. This would be the title used by Chinese emperors for the next 2,000 years, and the same can be said for a lot of other things he did. Now I can finally call him Qin Shi Huang. Many of the most significant things he did were after his conquests. Before him, the 7 warring states each had different units of measurement, coinage, writing, and road widths, so there was a lot of confusion across states. He standardized all of that. Now, everyone would buy and sell with the same type of money, and the same kind of units, and they would write with the same set of characters, and carriages would have the same axle widths, so they could run smoothly on roads of identical widths across the entire empire. Also, instead of sticking with the feudal system of governing, where he'd make his relatives dukes and lords, and put them in charge of different regions, Qin Shi Huang chose to push a centralized administration system across China. The central government, led by him, would appoint all prominent officials in the different provinces. This system made it easy to enact sweeping changes from the top down, but it demanded a lot of the leader at top. Back then, they wrote on bamboo slips, and it's said that Ying Zheng refused to go to sleep each night until he worked through at least 60 kilograms of these bamboo slips. That's 130 pounds for Americans. You can accuse him of a lot of things, but you cannot accuse him of being lazy. He spent the rest of his life tirelessly building his vision of a smoothly running empire. He commissioned new roads everywhere and connected stretches of existing walls in the north into the Great Wall to defend against raids by northern nomads. Eventually, he sent an army to defeat those nomads as well, along with another army to defeat the scattered tribes in the south. Then he truly ran out of things to conquer. As you would expect from someone who took over his entire known world, though, Qin Shi Huang was definitely a megalomaniac too. Every time he conquered a state, he built a replica of that state's palace in the Qing capital, then incorporated the type of hat its king wore into the uniforms of Qing officials. And let's not forget about his famous mausoleum, which is bigger than the entire Valley of the Kings in Egypt, and allegedly took 70,000 people 36 years to build. And the terracotta soldiers, Actually, only one out of like 600 side burial pits in the mausoleum. We're all so impressed by them, but they were so insignificant to Qin Shi Huang that they didn't even get mentioned in the historical records. What the records do say about his main burial chamber is that there's a model of China in there with mountains made of bronze and rivers made of flowing mercury. On the chamber's ceiling are the 28 traditional Chinese constellations studded out with gems and illuminated by lamps of mermaid oil. Modern researchers have done testing on the mausoleum grounds and have indeed detected abnormally high traces of mercury inside. They're not gonna excavate the mausoleum anytime soon though. China has a policy of not excavating imperial tombs unless it's an urgent recovery effort. The last time they opened an emperor's tomb was like 66 years ago, and bad things happened. So we don't do that anymore. Speaking of mercury though, in the last few years of Qin Shi Huang's life, he did go a little off the rails from possible mercury poisoning. The fact that mercury can be transformed from cinnabar and back somehow made people believe that it was the key to immortality. To be very fair to him, it took people a long time to realize the mercury was poisonous. Even emperors 1,000 years after him were still feasting on mercury pills. But like, at one point, Qin Shi Huang made a tree a rank 5 minister because it sheltered him during a storm, so like, his mind was not all that there by the end. Then there's also the whole burning books and burying scholars ordeal. Those were actually two separate events. He ordered the book burning because he was tired of Confucians fighting him about his societal reforms, because they were saying stuff like, "I haven't heard of a regime that lasts long if they don't follow the old ways." To which he was like, "Enough with the old ways! Burn the old ways!" As for the burying scholars, though, that was vastly overblown by the salty Confucians, who would dominate Chinese history after him. The so-called scholars he buried alive weren't even Confucians. They were scammer sorcerers who tried to promise him immortality. Also, it was just 460 people. Compared to all the people who died in his unification wars, we've been fixated on these 460 people? Come on. Finally, in 210 BCE, Qin Shi Huang died at age 49 while on a tour of his empire. To keep his death a secret, his closest advisors used a carriage of pickled fish to mask the smell of his rotting body. So much for that grand mausoleum. Also, the same advisors betrayed his last will and schemed to make his youngest son the next emperor, instead of his oldest son, who they sent a fake execution order. This youngest son was highly incompetent and even more tyrannical than Qin Shi Huang, so uprisings broke out everywhere, and the Qing dynasty fell just 3 years after Qin Shi Huang himself. Qin Shi Huang went down with a terrible reputation because people were free to talk shit about him so soon after his death. But it speaks to his utter destruction of the old social order that it was a commoner who became the founding emperor of the next dynasty, Han. Every single emperor after him would operate within the system he set up. Even when the empire broke apart, the goal of every warlord was to reunify it. No matter how anyone feels about Qin Shi Huang, they cannot entangle him from the concept of China, and they cannot deny his impact on the next 2,000 years of Chinese history. If Qin Shi Huang's story has fascinated you, I gotta tell you that he is the co-star of my new book, Zachary Yin and the Dragon Emperor, where he haunts a kid's AR gaming headset and compels him on a journey across China to heist magical artifacts. I tell a lot more stories about Qin Shi Huang and the Qing state in this book, and he will have to deal with endless magical attacks from other historical figures rightfully angry with him, like his failed assassins, Jin Ke and Gao Jianli. Oh, and here's him playing mahjong with Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, and Ramses II. It's that kind of book. Napoleon is screaming, crying, throwing up, and not being invited. Oh, and if you want Qin Shi Huang on your Twitter timeline, you can also find a really funny roleplay account on there, @RealShiHuangdi. Also, I have lots of upcoming appearances at various events, so look out for if I'll be coming by your area. I will come to Brazil, July 1st to July 4th, for a book festival in Sao Paulo. That's right, Brazil, for real. Then, from July 15th to July 18th, I will be in Toronto for Anime North. Then July 21st to July 24th, I will be in San Diego for Comic-Con. And then September 1st to September 5th, I'll be in Chicago for the Hugo Awards at Worldcon because I got nominated for the Lodestar and the Astounding Awards. If you live near any of these places, come and meet me and get your Iron Widow or Zachary Yin signed. I now have an events page on my website where you can check out the details of my appearances. Anyway, that was everything about the first emperor of China that I could fit into one video. I hope you learned some fun facts. Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and to my Patreons for their support, especially Margardian Lions, Cooper Malamute, Curious Madcat, Darion, Do It Out of Spite, Eduardo Aguirre, Nivchara, Jose Velazquez, Kakuga, Kytes Universe, Molly McAllister, Ricardo Navarro, and Shady Beach.